What's up, y'all? This is Hammer here again, back with another video. And today I'm going to be talking about a very unique topic. What I'm going to be talking about is essentially the Palestinian movement and how black people are leaving or have probably already left the Palestinian movement. And the reason why I want to speak about how, black people leaving the Palestinian movement, or I guess have already left the Palestinian movement, is largely because if you have been paying attention, right, since the 2024 presidential election in which Donald Trump, of course, was elected as the next U.S. president, what you have noticed is that, of course, if you are paying attention, what you would have noticed is that the Palestinian movement largely kind of disappeared, right? Died down and disappeared. And of course, now you have Trump and his administration, cracking down on pro-Palestine protesters or just people who have ever really, who have ever shown any sort of pro-Palestine protest or signs at all, right? So right now you have this sort of crackdown on pro-Palestine protests or people who have protested or shown sympathy for Palestine before. But in general, if you were paying attention, you would have seen that after Trump got reelected, especially from Trump's election, as from Trump being elected as the next U.S. president, right, up until now, the Palestinian movement has largely died, if not disappeared. And one of the main reasons for this is that have black people were essentially leaving the Palestinian movement and have probably already left the Palestinian movement. And people need to understand that in this country, right, we have Democrats and Republicans, right? Most people in the Democratic Party are essentially center left, and most people in the Republican Party are center right. And you have, of course, the people in the middle. And then, of course, you have the far left and the far right. Most of the supporters of the Palestinian movement came from the far left, specifically white leftists. So you had the far left, specifically white leftists, as well as black people who were the main energy source, main power source behind the pro-Palestine movement, right? The far right, of course, is far right is actually truly anti-Semitic. So, of course, they are against Israel from a point of view of hating the Jews, but they want real. So, of course, I guess you could say the far right. I guess you could say somewhat supported the far right, somewhat supported Palestine only because of their real, genuine anti-Semitism, but they weren't the main ones out there protesting, right? Most of the energy of the folks who were out here protesting were people on the far left, specifically white leftists and black people. In fact, I make the argument that one of the reasons why Jewish group, pro-Israel groups went so hard on black folks, because if you pay attention, during the entire pro-Palestine protest that happened last year, Jewish groups and pro-Israel groups went at black people hard. And the reason is because black people essentially are viewed as they're essentially viewed as being the face of morality. And because black people, specifically black Americans, are viewed as the face of morality, by them joining quote unquote the Palestinian movement, this allowed the Palestinian movement to tap into the social currency that black Americans provide. And the social currency black Americans provide is one, the historical grievances, and two, them being the face of morality. So, yeah, back Palestine because, this is the same as Jim Crow and slavery that black Americans went through. Back Palestine because, this is the same as sort of the moral movements and the civil rights movement of MLK. So it allowed the Palestinian movement to not only tap into the social currency of black American grievance, but also tap into, I guess you could say, the fact that black people were the face of morality, particularly black Americans were the face of morality. And so both the social currency of Black American grievance and the fact that Black Americans are somewhat viewed as the face of morality were things that helped the Palestinian movement, I will say, get as big as it did, right? Because look, in, I would say that in my entire life, now, maybe before I was born, this could have happened, but specifically for me speaking, in my entire life, I have never seen the Palestinian movement gain as much energy as it did in last year in 2024, right? Specifically after the October 7th attack. I will say for most of my life, you sort of had most of my life, you had, situations that will happen with Israel and Palestine here and there. They'll get some attention, but they'll essentially, die out and go away. But the advocacy that came out for Palestine in 2024, I have never seen anything like that. And I make the argument that part of that was two things. One, Palestinians, I guess you can say, yeah, the Palestinian movement being able to tap into the social currency of Black American grievances and Black Americans sort of being the face of morality, if not just Black, because Black people in general around the globe are the face of morality. For example, we think you think, for example, of Mandela in South Africa. Right? So Black people in general globally are the face of morality, but I will say more so when it comes to Black Americans because they have essentially become the face of Black people globally. So there were two reasons why the sort of Palestinian movement blew up as it did and got that much energy in 2024. One, they were able to take advantage of the social currency of Black American grievances. And two, they were able to take advantage of quote unquote Black Americans being the face of morality, right? In addition to that, they also had support from the far left, specifically white leftists. Both of those groups together, Black Americans as well as white leftists, I believe were the main reason why the Palestinian movement blew up as it did in America, as well as caught steam globally. Because a lot of the energy you saw overseas, that energy came from here. The same way how, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement started in America and then went overseas. The reparations movement started here and went overseas. And a lot of that is largely energy that is created by primarily Black Americans. Right? So in other words, the core reasons, right? One of the main core reasons as to why the Palestinian movement essentially was able to gain, I will say, the most support it ever had in my lifetime was because of two groups. One, Black people, and the fact that Black Americans, the fact that you were able to use, quote unquote, you were able to tap into the social currency of the Black American and social grievance, as well as tap into the fact that Black people globally, but specifically Black Americans, are the face of morality, right? And that's how the Black support helped the Palestinian movement. But in addition to that, you also had the far left, specifically white leftists, who also joined in, which also helped the Palestinian movement. So both of these two groups were the core reason as to why the Palestinian movement blew up so much in 2024. Then the question then becomes, okay, if Black Americans was such Black Americans and quote unquote white leftists, if Black Americans and the far left, specifically white leftists, were the core reason were the core force behind the Palestinian movement, in addition to, of course, Middle Eastern and Arab voters, why is it that after Trump got reelected, the movement died off, right? It wasn't just that Black people left, right? White leftists left too. So what happened? Well, let's sort of go back in history, right? Now, I would say that this story begins on October 7th. Before October 7th, right, I will say that, like I said before, right, most of my life, the Palestinian issue was like, lightning strikes. And what I mean by that is that, there'll be moments where quote unquote, it'll catch international attention here and there, but eventually fade away, right? Like lightning, the light shows and then it's gone, right? So before October 7th, for most of my life, the Palestinian issue was sort of like lightning strikes. It would show up here, catch international attention, and then just go away, right? Now, is it possible that before I was born, that there was another time where it got that many attention? Possibly, but I'm speaking specifically when it comes to my lifetime. So for most of my lifetime, specifically my lifetime, for most of my lifetime, the Palestinian movement, the Palestinian issue really was like a lightning strike. Here and there you have issues from Israel and Palestine that will gain international attention, but then go away, right? Everything changed with October 7th. When the October 7th attack happened, you had, in my opinion, a greater attention from the international community on Israel and Palestine. And then after the October 7th attack, when Israel then went on its offensive against the Palestinians in Gaza, this, in my opinion, brought the Palestinian issue to a level I have never seen on the international stage. I will say that when you saw those videos of them bombing those buildings going into Gaza, it essentially caused the Palestinian issue to rise up on the international stage in a way I've never seen that amount of international attention focused towards Palestine up until October 7th, and specifically the Israeli army, Israel's offensive against Gaza. So October 7th and sort of Israeli army offensive against Gaza brought the most international attention on the Palestinian issue I have seen in my life. And of course, this triggered a lot of the protests you saw here in America. Now, if you look at my screen, you will see, a tweet from BLM. Now, here's the thing. One of the earlier supporters of the Palestinian movements after October 7th, right, in America. So once again, when October 7th happened, and so first you have October 7th. So first you have the October 7th attack, then you have Israel's offensive against Gaza, then you have the international community focusing on the Palestinian issue in a way I've never seen in my life, then you have protests in America, and then you have all these groups starting to show support, like BLM, right, tweeting, hey, I stand with Palestine, right? This was the early sort of signs of black people, and specifically the far left and white leftists coming out. And that's what happened, right? Black folks came out, and you saw with BLM, right, coming out and support Palestine. Black people, for the most part, came out for the Palestinian issue. The far left, specifically white leftists, came out, and that caused the Palestinian issue to become a huge matter. The protests were everywhere. And the energy from the Palestinian protests in America spread globally. All of a sudden, all around the world, you see pro-Palestine protests. It got to such a level that even South Africa went ahead and sued Israel and brought Israel to the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, in regards to genocide. Saying that, hey, Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, right? That's how much the protests here in America spread globally. So first you had the sort of October 7th attack. Then you had the quote-unquote Israeli offensive against Gaza, right? And both of those events caused the international community to focus on the Palestinian issue in a way I've never seen in my life. This increased focus on the Palestinian issue eventually led to the protests we saw here in America, mainly driven by black and by black people and the far left, specifically white leftists. And black people and the far left, specifically white leftists, came together, with the main driver behind the pro-Palestine protests here, in addition to the other Arab voter groups. And the energy from those protests spread across the globe until you saw protests all around the world. And the energy got to the energy got so intense that even a country like South Africa went out there and sued Israel and brought them to the ICJ in regards to genocide. And this happened, I will say, for most of 2024. And trust and believe that the pushback from the pro-Jewish groups and the pro-Israel groups was the same. Okay, I'm like, you had so many folks going at the Palestinian protests. It was insane. I'm like, they were going after universities. I'm like, for example, Claudine Gay was forced to sort of, like they removed Claudine Gay from her position at Harvard. Based on my understanding, she was the president of Harvard, and they got her out that position because of the whole pro-Palestine issue. I mean, it was crazy, right? And one thing you also saw is that, it wasn't just a protest against Palestine, sort of a general, protest against the offensive in Gaza and against Israel. The Palestinian protest, the Palestinian movement was not only protesting when it came to Gaza and Israel, they were also going after Biden. They were saying, Genocide Joe, right? Yeah, you're doing this. I mean, it got to such a point where you had the uncommitted movement, right, in which during the Democratic presidential primary, you had a lot of quote unquote people within the Democratic presidential primary vote uncommitted. Right, these were the folks who were part of that, Palestine movement. Now, of course, Biden, of course, still got a nomination, of course, to the Democratic Party, but it shows you how deep it was, right? But even though you had the Palestinian movement, protesting against, even though you had the sort of Palestinian movement protesting when it came to Gaza, protesting when it came to Israel, even doing the so-called unquote uncommitted movement as a form of protest against Biden and still protesting against Biden, in general, I will say that a majority of Arab voters still, I think, were leaning towards going for Biden, even though they were still kind of protesting and had issues with the way he was handling the issue of Israel and Palestine. All right, so the Palestinian movement was out there in full force, and it was also going at Joe Biden, and specifically Arab voters were also going at Joe Biden when it came to Israel and Palestine, but there was still a sense that, specifically amongst Arab voters, there was still someone leaning towards supporting Biden, even if they had the issues when it came to how Biden was handling the issue when it came to Gaza and Palestine and Israel and all that kind of stuff. But then everything changed when Kamala came into race. See, for most of 2024, right, you had the Palestinian protests. They were going hard when it came to Israel, Gaza, Palestine, right? All of that stuff. But I noticed that even well, yeah, look, they were going hard. They were going hard. So for most of 2024, the Palestinian movement was going hard when it came to Gaza, Israel, and Palestine, right? But specifically, what you saw though with the Arab voters, that even though they were also protesting, when it came to Israel, Gaza, and Palestine, I would make the argument that most of them were still somewhat leaning towards Biden. Now, when it came to the, I will say most of the Democratic, when it came to most of the protesters within the Palestinian movement, I think that at the time, they were still somewhat leaning towards. So in other words, what you essentially had was the Palestinian movement, right? That was going against Gaza, Palestine. What you essentially had was that the Palestinian movement that was out here protesting when it came to Gaza, Palestine, and Israel, even though they were protesting those issues and protesting against Biden, I think most of them were still leaning towards voting for Biden, despite their pro-Palestine protest, and then despite them criticizing Biden for how he was handling the Palestine situation. And I think the same thing applied to the Arab voters too, from the point of view that from the point of view that Arab voters were also a part of the Palestinian protest movement. They were also protesting when it came to Gaza, Palestine, Israel, and also protesting when it came to Joe Biden, but still somewhat leaned towards Joe Biden. So what you had was both the people in the Palestinian movement and the quote unquote Arab voters who were part of the Palestinian movement, despite the protests when it came when it came to the Palestinian movement, still somewhat leaned towards Biden. It was still open. They were still open when it came to Biden. But everything changed when Kamala Harris entered the race. When Kamala Harris entered the race, all of a sudden, you start to see people within the Palestinian movement. Right now, black people, of course, came out from Kamala Harris, but non-black people within the Palestinian movement and the Arabs, all of a sudden, came out here and said, we are not, quote unquote, vote for Kamala Harris. Now, here's the thing. That's the prerogative. The issue that black people specifically had is that, wait a minute, when Joe Biden, what was in office, yes, you're protesting against him, Genocide Joe. We weren't hearing that many folks coming out here and we were not hearing that many folks coming out here saying they were not going to vote for Biden, right? A lot of y'all were still open to Biden. Why is it that the moment Kamala Harris enters the race, all of a sudden now you guys are like, no. Like it's almost like when Joe Biden was in there, right? The protests, if we were to rank it from like a 0 to 10, right? When Joe Biden was in there, despite all the pro-Palestine protests, the opposition of Joe Biden was like, I don't know, 5 out of 10. And right now there was still space. But in the moment Kamala Harris enters in, it becomes 10 out of 10, right? It goes from like 5 to 10 it goes from 5 out of 10 opposition when it comes to Joe Biden to like 10 out of 10 when it comes to Kamala Harris. And you're citing the Palestinian issue, but okay, fine. But you were also protesting Joe Biden when it came to the Palestinian issue, but y'all were still open to voting for him. But yet when it comes to Kamala Harris, who isn't even the president, y'all are citing the Palestinian issue as to why you won't vote for her at all. So a lot of black folks were like, what the fuck's going on? And it was from both sides, right? It was from, I would say, non-black people within the Palestinian movement, as well as specifically the Arab voters. I would say the Arab voters were the ones that were much more louder about it. And that's sort of how it played out. Now, black people within the Palestinian movement were angry because a lot of them felt like it was a sense of quote unquote anti-blackness, right? From the point of view that, okay, you have the quote unquote the non-black people within the Palestinian movement, specifically the white. Once again, I already told y'all, most of the Palestinian movement was made up of black people and white leftists. So you had the non-black people, specifically the white leftists, who were saying we're not going to vote for quote unquote we're not going to go out here and quote unquote vote for Kamala Harris when it came to because of the Palestinian issue. And a lot of black people, okay, well, it seems like, right, for a lot of y'all white leftists, there is a sense of anti-black from the point of view that, okay, when it was a white dude in there, y'all didn't have the pushback was there, but it wasn't as much. But then now the black females, all of a sudden now it's a problem. And it also feels like a lot of y'all thinking, oh, well, black folks already have their. So in other words, a lot of black people felt like it was a couple of things, right? One, the fact that it went from a white dude to a black female was the reason why a lot of the quote unquote white leftists all of a sudden now were just saying no to Kamala Harris, even though they were still open to Biden. Another reason is that they thought is that a lot of white leftists felt like black people already had the quote unquote black president, right? Obama, right? So we don't need another. And number three, a lot of them also felt like Kamala Harris being appointed was causing black people to divert more of their energy from the Palestinian movement towards Kamala Harris. And fourth, a lot of these white leftists are still white, meaning that even if Trump will go into office, at the end of the day, them being white folks, they're not gonna face the brunt of it. So for a lot of black folks, okay, well, it seems like these are the reasons why the quote unquote white leftists are essentially now backing away from Kamala Harris, right? One, Kamala Harris Kamala Harris is not white. Two, they feel like black people already have the quote unquote black president. Three, they feel like they'll be unaffected by Trump being in office because they're already white. And four, they feel like Kamala Harris is taking too much energy from black voters, from black people. Kamala Harris, being the frontrunner, is causing black people to take more and more energy from the Palestinian movement towards Kamala Harris. So a lot of black folks feel like, okay, you guys all of a sudden, somewhat being open to Joe Biden despite the protests, and now all of a sudden saying absolutely no when it comes to Kamala Harris is a sense of anti-blackness, and there were many reasons that black people felt, and I just listed the reasons why, right? So the reasons I listed are the reasons why a lot of black people felt, the white leftists were quote unquote now all of a sudden so opposed to Kamala Harris, and how a lot of that was also quote unquote pushed. A lot of that was also driven by anti-blackness. Then when you go to the Arab voters, right, the Arab Muslim voters, right, who said who did the same thing, right? When it came to quote unquote Joe Biden, they were all open despite the protests. But when it came to Kamala Harris, it was absolutely no. A lot of black people thought, hey, that's also anti-blackness, right? From the point of view that, one, you guys also feel like, hey, you already have your black president. Two, a lot of you guys feel like black people, supporting Kamala Harris. I guess, a lot of you guys felt like black people were also, a lot of them felt like black people were also, I guess you could say, taking a lot of energy from the Palestinian movement and instead directing it toward the Kamala. In other words, because black folks are so much in favor of Kamala Harris, their energy towards the Palestinian movement, in other words, they're shifting more and more of their energy from the Palestinian movement towards Kamala Harris, and they're not going as hard, right? And number three, a lot of those Arabs feel entitled to quote unquote black people's labor and support. And four, a lot of those Arabs genuinely felt like, just like the white leftists, that if Trump gets into power, they may be affected, but not as affected as quote unquote black folks. So when the Arab voters, the Middle Eastern Arab voters, went from being open to supporting Joe Biden despite their protests to all of a sudden saying no to Kamala Harris, black people also saw that as a form of anti-blackness, right? And I've already listed the quote unquote reason why. One, a lot of black people genuinely felt like, one, Arab Middle Eastern voters felt like, black people already had the quote-unquote black president. Two, this was causing black people to quote-unquote shift too much energy from the Palestinian movement towards Kamala Harris. Three, there was a sort of entitlement to black people's labor and support. And four, they felt like, hey, if Trump gets office, we will be affected, but not as much as black people, right? So all of those things is the reason why black people felt like, Arab Middle Eastern voters going from being open to support Joe Biden despite the protests against him to now saying no to Kamala Harris was a sense of anti-blackness. So now what you saw was a split, right? It was shown that the Palestinian movement was causing a lot of a fracture. Right, there's a lot of fracture that was happening within the Palestinian movement because black folks, right, felt like there was a lot of anti-blackness that quote unquote appeared the moment Kamala Harris came into office, and it kept building up. It kept building, like the coalition kept fracturing, right, and it was primarily because there were two pillars, right? There were white leftists, black people, and then you had some, you have the quote-unquote Middle Eastern Arab voters who were there, but they were not the main energy behind it. Now you had one of the main pillars, black people, kind of pulling away. Like they were already starting to kind of pull away already because they felt like the moment Kamala Harris came into the race, all this anti-blackness showed up within the Palestinian movement, right? Within the folks who were within the Palestinian movement. And then when the election came and you saw that one, Arab voters did not come out, right, the way they were supposed to when it came to Kamala Harris. And in fact, a lot of them even went ahead and voted for Donald Trump. And then on top of that, the white leftists, right, they did not come out the way they were supposed to, right, when it came to Kamala Harris. All of these things those things, in my opinion, shattered the Palestinian movement, right? One, black people said we're done. So when the election time came and they saw all these, when the election time came and they saw white women, they saw Latinos, they saw a lot of these other groups, that one did not come out for Kamala Harris the way they thought, and two, went a little bit more for Donald Trump compared to what they would have expected. Specifically Arabs and Latinos, for example. It was like, we done. So it wasn't just that in general black people were shocked at how, so many folks from white women to Latinos to other groups went more for Trump, but is that specifically within, but in addition to that, specifically within the, in other words, it wasn't just that when the election happened, black people saw all these groups from white women to Latinos and these other groups, go for Trump the way they did, or I guess, not go for Kamala the way they expected. In addition to that, to sort of that shock and surprise to black people, it's also that within the Palestinian movement, they saw how Arab Middle Eastern voters did not come out for Kamala Harris the way they expected. And a lot of them even went ahead and went for Trump. But also the far left, particularly white leftists, also they did not come out for Kamala Harris the way they expected. So this caused black people to essentially pull out of the Palestinian movement after the election. They essentially were done, right? And then, of course, when it came to the white leftists, right, well, with Donald Trump now being in power, and also there's also, in my opinion, I will say that a lot of white leftists, right, even though they didn't come out for Kamala Harris the way they were supposed to, they didn't really go for Trump either. So in addition to black people sort of leaving the Palestinian movement because of the sense of betrayal, in addition to black people leaving the Palestinian movement because they felt a sense of betrayal because Arab voters did not go out for Kamala Harris the way they were supposed to, and a lot of them even went for Trump, as well as the far left, including the white leftists, also did not come out for Kamala Harris the way they were supposed to, right? So those things caused black people to kind of leave the Palestinian movement in terms of because of betrayal, but a lot of the white leftists also left because of two things. One, okay, well, now that Trump is now in office, the environment has changed. Black people are sort of no longer in there. There's no longer, the energy of the Palestinian movement has sort of died out, right? Then on top of that, a lot of white leftists were also pissed at the Arabs. Because even though the white left does not come out for Kamala Harris the way they were supposed to, they didn't go for Trump either. So there was a sense of anger of, okay, if you Arabs now did not want to go for Kamala Harris, fine, but for a lot of y'all to go for Trump? So both of those things, right? Black people feeling betrayed, black people leaving the Palestinian movement because they felt a sense of betrayal of how the Arabs and the Arab and Middle Eastern, as well as the far left white leftists, did not go out for Kamala Harris the way they were supposed to, right? That caused black people to feel betrayed and leave. But also a lot of white leftists also left because one, Trump being in office and black people leaving meant that the energy for the Palestinian movement was not there anymore like that. And number two, they also felt a sort of anger that the Arab voters a lot of them vote for Trump. I mean, okay, if you didn't want for Kamala, if you did not want for Kamala, that's fine. But the fact that so many of the Arab and Middle Eastern voted for Trump, that also turned them off. In addition to the fact that black people leaving and Trump coming into office, caused the energy of the Palestinian movement to go away. So both of those things, right, caused black I guess you could say both blacks and the white leftists to leave the Palestinian movement. So black people left the Palestinian movement because they felt betrayed by how the Arab Middle Easterners and the white leftists did not go out for Kamala Harris the way they were supposed to, and the far left, especially white leftists, left the Palestinian movement because one, the energy of the Palestinian movement had been greatly diminished because black people are left and Trump was now in office, right, creating a completely different environment. And also on top of that, they were also angry at the Arabs because so many Arabs went for Trump. Meaning, okay, if the Arabs chose not to support Kamala, that's fine. But the fact that so many of the Arabs and Middle Eastern voters went for Trump also turned off the white leftist voters, causing them to also leave the Palestinian movement. So what you end up having is that after the election, both black people and the far left, specifically white leftists, had essentially left the Palestinian movement. And because of the two groups that were creating the energy behind the Palestinian movement, when they left, the Palestinian movement died. And all you essentially had left was just the Arab and the Middle Eastern group. And since the global pro-Palestine movement, right, the energy for the globe, because the energy for the global pro-Palestine movement came from America, once the pro-Palestine movement sort of died here because black people and the far left, specifically white leftists, left the movement, what you saw is that as the pro-Palestine movement died here in America, it also died, quote unquote, globally too. So since the election till now, what you essentially saw is that for the reasons I have stated in the video, black people left the Palestinian movement. The far left, especially white leftists, left the Palestinian movement. The Palestinian movement died off, and a lot of the and because the Palestinian movement died off in America, this caused the Palestinian movement globally to also die off. Because why? The Palestinian movement globally was getting a lot of its energy from the Palestinian movement in America. So once the Palestinian movement in America died off, the Palestinian movement globally also slowly died off too. Now, of course, South Africa is still suing Israel in the ICJ, but overall, you've seen that globally, the Palestinian movement has sort of very much died off since Trump, being elected as the next U.S. president. And a lot of that has to do to the fact that the Palestinian movement, quote unquote, died off here in America due to the fact that black people and white leftists left the Palestinian movement. So that's important to state. So why does it matter? It matters because now that we have established that, okay, the Palestinian movement mostly died off after the election because black people and the far left, specifically white leftists, left the Palestinian movement for the reasons I have stated in the video, which caused the Palestinian movement to die in America, which then caused the Palestinian movement to die globally because the global Palestinian movement was getting its energy from the American Palestinian movement. So in other words, once the Palestinian movement in America died off, it of course led to the Palestinian movement globally dying off. And even though Israel is still going at, and even though South Africa is still going at Israel in the ICJ, overall, due to the fact that the Palestinian movement, quote unquote, died off in America, the global Palestinian movement also died off globally, in spite of the fact that South Africa is still pursuing Israel when it comes to the ICJ. And in addition to that, what you have seen is that in addition to the Palestinian movement kind of going away, you have instead now seen Trump and his administration cracking down on pro-Palestine, protesters, as well as anybody who has shown any sympathy towards the quote-unquote pro-Palestinian cause, right? So it's crazy how we went from the Palestine movement of last year, where the energy was able, to now the Palestine movement is gone, and the quote unquote pro Palestine protesters, or anyone who was shown any degree of pro Palestine protest, is literally facing a crackdown by Trump's administration. So you go from 2024, where the Palestinian movement is everywhere, to now where the Palestinian movement is gone and the pro-Palestine protesters are quote-unquote being cracked down, and anybody who's shown any sense of, quote-unquote being pro-Palestine, or I guess protesting for Palestine, is also being cracked down by Trump and his administration. I mean, it's crazy, right? And the crazy part is that the only people left now in the Palestinian movement are mostly the Arab and Middle Eastern folks. Because once again, black people have left the Palestinian movement for the most part, and quote unquote the far left, specifically white leftists, have left the Palestinian movement. So now it's just Arabs. And so Arabs are the only ones really left. The Arab and Middle Eastern voters are the only ones really left. And now they are bearing the brunt of the quote unquote crackdown on the pro-Palestine protesters. Because once again, most of the energy of the Palestine movement was black people and the far left, specifically white leftists. So once black people and the far left, specifically white leftists, left the Palestinian movement has essentially died out. And all that was left of it was just Arab and quote unquote Middle Eastern voters. But because they were not the main energy behind the Palestinian movement, they were never really able to sort of bring back that energy after black people, and specifically the far left, white leftists, left the movement. So it essentially became dead with only just Arab and Middle Eastern voters left within, I guess you could say, a dead. So all you have now is Arab and Middle Eastern voters left within a dead Palestinian movement, and now they are bearing the brunt of the quote unquote crackdown on pro-Palestine protesters by Trump and his administration. So Trump and his administration are not only just cracking down on pro-Palestine protesters, they're also cracking down on anyone who's ever shown any sort of quote unquote pro-Palestine. And if you look at it, most of the folks who are being targeted do tend to be of Arab and quote unquote Middle Eastern descent. So what you essentially have now is that, because black people and the far left, especially the quote unquote white leftists, have left the Palestinian movement, it has essentially caused the Palestinian movement to essentially be a dead movement made up of mostly Arab and Middle Eastern quote unquote voters. And the reason why the Palestinian movement has become nothing more than a dead movement of mostly Arab and Middle Eastern voters, because once again, the main energy of the Palestinian movement was black people and the far left, particularly white leftists. So once black people and the far left, specifically white leftists, left the Palestinian movement, right, they essentially took their energy with them, which caused the Palestinian movement to become a dead movement, mostly made up of Arab and Middle Eastern voters. And now they are bearing, right, those same Arab and Middle Eastern voters who now make up the majority of a dead Palestinian movement, are now taking on the brunt of the quote-unquote crackdown on pro-Palestine protesters, or anyone who's ever shown any degree of being pro-Palestine, by Trump and his administration. That's where we're at. So overall, I think I have done the best I can to sort of break down the core reason as to why black people are leaving, or I guess you could say have already left the Palestinian movement. Yes, the far left and the white leftists also left, but the video was really about focusing as to why black people essentially are leaving the Palestinian movement, or I guess you could say have already left the Palestinian movement. Okay, well, that's my video. Y'all tell me what y'all think in the chat. Like, share, subscribe, hammer out.